Oh, hi. I'm Jim Buskirk, and I'm here in San Marcos, California, at my home on Oleander Avenue, and just was out having a little targets practice with my genuine 1940 copper-banded Red Ryder BB gun. As you can see, I have an array of old daisies here, mostly Red Ryders. In the rack on the far right is most of the classic Daisy BB guns from the 1930s, including the Buzz Barton, Buck Jones, Golden Eagle, 104 double barrel. There's a Lone Scout down at the bottom. And then this is basically a chronology of the Red Ryder BB guns from the time that they came out in 1940 with the copper banded model, down through the other years and up until the early 70s when the Red Ryder, the Red Ryder was discontinued for a while, as you know, in the late 50s, and then they brought it back in 72 with the model 1938. And then right after that, they went from the 1938 to the 1938A, which quickly became the 1938B. And these are all different variations from over the years of the 1938B. Now, I don't have every 1938B special commemorative model that they ever made because there's a profusion of them now. The Daisy Museum has produced quite a few, and I haven't really totally kept up with all the later variations. But basically, it's a pretty good representation of the Red Ryder down through the years from 1940 up to about 1990. Over here is a bit of a duplication of what we have there. The only difference here is that these guns all have the original box, and starting at the top with the Daisy Carbine Lightning loader, and the 40 Red Ryder, and so on. Each with the original box, including of course the 40 Red Ryder has the box that says golden banded. And by the way, that gun is I got this from the original owner. He lived down in LA, and I met him at a gun show, and I bought it from him several years ago. So it's really kind of an icon, because to find a 40 Red Ryder in the original box is, well, pretty hard to do. Jim Buskirk, Buzz Buskirk, and some of you that see this DVD may remember me from the years when I was the publisher of the Toy Gun Collectors of America newsletter. I met many of you, the collectors that are going to see this DVD, back east when I was traveling back there looking for old BB guns and cap guns. I'm here with Will White today, shooting a little film on BB gun history and some of my own personal history. I was born in 1930, so I'm approaching 80 years of age, and I probably got started in what was the B-Western era, and most of the guys that you see on this t-shirt were my heroes when I was growing up in the 1930s. I got interested in cap guns like any other kid at that time, when you could buy fireworks and caps, and there weren't all the prohibitions that they have now on those things. And there was a model shop on Western Avenue in Los Angeles, near where we lived. And I used to go in there and look at the models and things, and of course coveted everything they had in there, but couldn't buy it because money was pretty scarce then. And one of the things that they had in there that always got my attention, and I would stand and gaze at it, was a cast iron Texan Cap Gun made by Hubley. And it was on a shelf up behind the cash register, out of the box like that. And I would look at that and long to have it. I think I was maybe 8 years old. But it was $1. And I didn't even ask my father to buy it because it was out of the question. But we had a wealthy uncle, and one day when he was visiting our house, I mentioned the cap gun. And he, I'm sure, decided right away he was going to buy it for me, but I didn't know that. And he said, well, let's walk up to Western Avenue, and you can show me that cap gun. So we walked up there, and I'd never handled it, never had the courage to ask the proprietor to let me touch it. And my uncle Dave asked to see it, and he brought it down, and he handed it to me, and boy, I looked at it and thought it was the greatest thing that I'd ever seen in my life, just about. And then he said, how'd you like to have that cap gun, Jimmy? Well, I think my skin crawls when I think about how I felt when he said that, because then I knew he was going to buy it for me. And he was going to spend a whole dollar to buy the thing. So that was my introduction to Western cap guns, which are really an important part of the collectibles in the cap gun genre. And they made cap guns for so long, like BB guns, that it's hard to collect them all. So you have to pick a period. And I think the most popular period is the Western repeaters that were made right before World War II by Stevens, Hubley, Kilgore, and Kenton. And they're, amongst cap gun collectors, I think they're the top of the line. Well, my life went on, and I finally wound up going in the service during Korea. And when I got back, my younger brother had somehow gone through all my stuff, and all my cap guns and BB guns and comic books and everything were history by that time. But in about 1942, I think, I managed to acquire my first BB gun. And my friend Eddie Balin, who lived around the corner, had gotten a copper-banded Red Ryder for Christmas. Now, I'd laid on the floor in the living room in front of our radio listening to the Lone Ranger programs, and I used to get the Open Road for Boys, and I laid there with that ad in front of my face many, many times, dreaming of owning that golden banded Red Ryder carbine. Well, I never got one. My dad finally took me down to Stevenson Hardware Store in Montebello, California, and when he got down there, he found that instead of spending $1.95 on that copper banded Red Ryder, you could buy a very similar little gun for, or no, it wasn't $1.95, it was $2.95. You could buy a similar little gun for $2.50. So this was 45 cents cheaper. So this is what I wound up with, the carbine. And that was my first, and actually that was my only BB gun. That lasted me through the BB gun era when we were growing up and walking through the orange groves, and I hope nobody broke their teeth on the many BBs that we put into those oranges as we walked through the groves. But that was the only BB gun I had, was the little carbine. I never did get a copper-banded Red Ryder. And then, finished high school, went in the service, and got married and had kids and all that. And one day I was at the Long Beach Antique and Collectible flea market at the Veterans Stadium. And I was walking along and I saw this set of cap guns. And I knew they weren't from my era, but it was really a beautiful set. And I talked to the guy, and I think he quoted me a price of $37 for this set. And so I looked at them and I thought, gee, they'd be really nice to have, but what would I do with them? So I went on down the aisle looking at other stuff, and about that time Eleanor, my wife, showed up and said, I said, there's a guy back here that's got this set of cap guns, and don't ask me why, but I have to buy them. And she said what she always says when I want to buy something, well, go buy them. And so I did for $37. And I've had a big collection of cap guns and sold almost all of them, but I've always hung on to this first set that I had. And these are the big Hubley Cowboy, very popular and collectible gun. Here's another set, same guns, nicer rig, and tight fit here. These are in a little bit better condition in terms of finish and so on. But anyhow, that was my introduction into cap guns. And I started looking for cap guns. There were other things we were collecting at the time, but I had my eye out for cap guns, and I'd buy one here and buy one there, never really knowing what I was buying, or I just bought things that appealed to me. And after a while, I decided, they have all these newsletters for everybody, for people that collect salt and pepper shakers or Wallace Nutting pictures or whatever it happens to be, and I thought, I should have a newsletter. So I got a hold of a fellow named Sam Logan. I can't remember exactly how I got in touch with Sam, but Sam was a cap gun collector, mostly old cast iron, and he was a professor at UC Davis. And I talked to him about starting a newsletter, and he said he thought it would be a good idea. Why not do it? And I said, okay. And I put an ad in Toy Shop, nationwide tabloid-size newspaper for toy collectors. I put an ad in there. And Sam Logan said, well, why don't you contact Charles Best? I don't have his book out here, but Charles Best had written a book on cast iron cap guns. And I think he was in Colorado at the time. He'd moved to Colorado. And so Sam said, why don't you contact Charles Best and try to get his mailing list? And I said, well, do you think he'd give it to me? And he said, Sam said, I think he would give it to you because it would promote the hobby. And so I wrote Charles Best, and by golly, he sent me his mailing list. And then I got some response from the ads that I'd put out and went from there and started off, I think, with about 50 or 60 subscribers the first year, which was 1989. And published the newsletter for 11 years. And it was about 50-50 cap guns and BB guns. And after 11 years, to tell the truth, I just kind of ran out of stuff to write about. I'd pretty much covered everything that I knew, and I passed the newsletter off to Charles Utley back east, and he did it for 7 years, and then he finally decided that he didn't want to do it anymore. But it was a good ride, and I got to know a lot of people, and just had a great time doing it, and a great time collecting. Meanwhile, Eleanor and I had decided to focus on cast iron, 6-shooters, repeaters from pre-World War II. And we were out to buy all of them, and there's, I'm going to say, 40, something like that. And we tried to find them all in the box. And we darn near did. And at one time, there were 3 display cases lined up along this wall underneath the BB guns. And they were full of these old cap guns, these cast iron Western cap guns in the original boxes. It was a great collection. But eventually we decided, since I'm, quote, getting along in years, that you can't keep everything, so we decided to sell that collection, and we did. We sold it on eBay, and if you're a cap gun collector, you can imagine what we got for the cast iron Gene Autry's in the box, the Long Tom in the box. I had the 2 variations of the Kilgore Roy Rogers cast iron, one of them in the original box, and so on. So we did quite well in terms of money on when we resold everything, and we had a really good time. And if I can just diverge for a second and tell you that we took some trips that took us all the way to Maine, scrounging every antique mall and every shop that we could possibly find, coming and going, and visiting people that subscribed to the newsletter, because the welcome mat was out for me. I was the man, and didn't know nearly as much as everybody thought I knew, to tell the truth. But so on one of our trips, we had 2 tables at the Chicago Toy Show, Kane County Toy Show. And if you're a collector, you know about the Kane County Toy Show. People come from all over the world to look for old toys. We had 2 tables there, and we were set up and ready to go before the show opened. I guess some of the early birds were already in, but we threw bed sheets over our tables and went outside to sit on a bench to have a cup of coffee before the action really started. And we became aware that there were 2 fellows on the next bench, and they were talking about cap guns. And so we kind of sat there drinking our coffee and listening to this conversation. And finally, one guy turned to the other and he says, well, to tell you the truth, he said, the main reason I drove down here from Wisconsin is, he says, because I want to meet Jim Buskirk. Well, I don't have much of an ego. I really don't. And we both kind of looked at each other and kind of chuckled, about that. So I got up and walked over and I said, did I hear you say that you came here to meet Jim Buskirk? And he said, yes, I did. He looked up at me and I said, well, meet Jim Buskirk. I'm Buzz, So we always thought that was funny. Then when the show opened, I'm not kidding you, the first half a day there, we had a line at our table. And it would be from 3 to 6 or 8 or sometimes 10 people and they were all waiting to meet me personally. You know, and it was like, I was really kind of shocked and amazed. But they were all people that I felt like I knew, and they felt like they knew me because they had been sending in ads to go in the newsletter, and I knew their names. And a lot of times, like when George Mitchell came up, I said, "Oh, hi, George, Minburn, Iowa, right?" And, yeah, and we shook hands. And so I kind of knew something about these guys because of the contacts that I'd made while doing the newsletter. It was a great run. But anyway, we finally got rid of the cap guns. And because of eBay, I mean, why rent tables and drive halfway across the country to sell stuff when you could do it right from your own computer room? So we stopped doing shows. And for a while, Chuck Quinn, who probably has the best collection of Western cap guns in the world, he's from Danville, California. Chuck would come down, and once a year we had our own show here in Santa Ana at the Elks Club. And we got pretty good attendance. We'd usually have 40 tables, and a lot of guys would come from back east. We didn't get a lot of people coming in off the street, paid admissions, but it was a get-together for collectors, and we would buy and trade from each other. And so it was a lot of fun, and we did that for several years. Now, well, let's just show one interesting set here. This is the kind of stuff that cap gun collectors will die for. Now, this is the Lasso and Bill set. These are made by Keyston Brothers of San Francisco, and their leather is considered to be the very best. They made real gun leather and real saddles. And I found this, I think, on Yahoo somewhere. It wasn't on eBay, thank goodness, because I couldn't have afforded it. And here's a picture of the original owner of this set wearing it that came with the set. And here's the whole set with the cuffs, spurs, and if you're a cap gun collector, you'll know that you don't see a lot of cast iron spurs. These are cast iron, not die cast. And the guns are the first model Texan Juniors. You can tell it's the first model because it has the Rampant Colt logo on the grip here. I understand that after they came out with these guns, they were contacted by Colt Firearms and told that they probably shouldn't be using that Rampant Colt logo. So they turned it into a star after Colt told them that they shouldn't be doing that. And here's the original bullets. Now these bullets, for collectors that haven't seen these, and you will find these occasionally in cap gun sets, this is a 32 rimfire blank. Small hole here. And these are copper, or at least copper plated. And originally it looks like the projectile in them was painted white to go with the set. I took them out because, you know, the verdigris that copper generates was already reacting on the leather here, so I took these out of the set to keep that from happening. But I mean, this is the kind of stuff that, I mean, you can't hardly find it anywhere. And it was just pure stroke of luck that I found it where I did, on an off channel on the internet, because if it had been on eBay, I couldn't have touched it. Well, eventually, after publishing the newsletter for a short time and getting some feedback from BB gun collectors, I began to get interested in BB guns. And eventually I got in touch with a fellow from Michigan named Bob Surface. And Bob sent me a chronology of the Red Ryder BB guns and told which models they were, or variations, I should say, because they were all number 111 Model 40s. But how they'd changed over the years, you know, like the stuff up on the rack over here, you know, the copper banded gun, and then the other guns that they made right before the war and then right after the war, and so on. And, you know, there's just little nuances of variations that separate those guns and make them a little bit different than the gun that preceded them. So I began to get interested in this, and I thought, boy, that would be a lot of fun to collect these Red Ryder BB guns. At the same time, my memory harked back to the days when I had the carbine and my friend Eddie Balin had that copper-banded 40 Red Ryder that I coveted so much. So I started getting interested in BB guns. And let me just digress and say that the chronology I got was done by Jim Thomas of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Jim was a good friend of Cass Huff's. They were both World War II guys. And Jim used to drive over to Rogers and go in and drink coffee with Cass, and they'd sit with their feet up and shoot the bull about World War II and so on. So he had an inside track, and he would ask Cass a lot of questions, which were, of course, based on Cass's memory at that time, you know. And we know that memory isn't always correct, but it's a good guideline to start out with, at least. So this chronology from Bob Surface that had been written by Jim Thomas. So Jim, by the way, I nicknamed Mr. Daisy, and everybody around the country who collected BB guns eventually began to know him as Mr. Daisy. Jim had a very nice collection, and he was a gold mine of information for me, because to tell the truth, when I first started on BB guns, I really didn't know much. But he gave me a lot of feedback, and so did a lot of the other collectors, many of them located in Michigan, where those first Red Ryders were made. West Powers, and there's a guy, I think he's from Illinois, Bob Spielvogel, Frank Knapp from Rochester, New York, Mel Robeson from Reno. I'm trying to think of, another guy, the guy that's in Minburn, Iowa, I can't think of his name right now. George Mitchell from Minburn, Iowa. Anyway, these guys all gave me feedback, and I began to learn. And then I was looking for this out-of-print book that was impossible to find, but eventually I found a copy. And this was the only book at that time that had been written that was a chronology of Daisy and King BB guns, and many other collectible BB guns too, by the way, with pictures. And so this was by Arnie Dunathan, and he was a professor up in northern Michigan. And once again, like anybody that writes a book, he didn't get everything right, but believe me, that book was just like it was a treasure trove of information on Daisy and King BB guns. And he also included the whole array of Atlas, Bijou, Matchless, Sterling, American Toolworks, Upton, Wyandotte. I mean, the list goes on. There's probably close to 50 people that made BB guns that didn't last. Daisy outlasted them all. And then, of course, and once again, everything in this book is not necessarily correct. For example, Cass says the first Buzz Barton came out in 1934, February 1934. I ask you, why was Daisy advertising the BB gun for sale in October of 32? Huh? I think Cass got that one wrong. But both of those books are great books, and if you're a BB gun collector, they belong in your library if you can possibly find them. And you will find them on eBay. They're out there. Anyway, so I made this transition, and I began to look for BB guns. And of course, the one BB gun that I was looking for above all others was the .40 Red Ryder. And we looked and looked everywhere. We were collecting other things at the time and traveling up and down the state. And finally, at the Long Beach Antique and Collectible Flea Market, I walked out of there one day with two BB guns in my arms, and I looked at Eleanor and I said, 2 copper-banded Red Ryders. 2 copper-banded Red Ryders. I couldn't believe it. After looking for a copper-banded Red Ryder for months, I found 2 of them at the same show. Well, over the years, I found a lot more of them, of course. I mean, they're out there. They made them by the millions, and I've probably now own or have owned between 50 and 75 .40 Red Ryders. Most of them, if you're a collector, were not really in good condition. They got left out in the woodshed or out in the garage. Well, after I finally found my copper-banded Red Ryder, and my interest in BB guns grew, and I began to learn more about them. And I was in touch with, in '92, I had visited Wes Powers in Tecumseh, Michigan, and Wes showed me his collection, which really, would stimulate anybody's interest, because he's probably got the best collection of old And when I say old, I'm talking about turn of the century and before, BB guns in the country. I mean, it's a marvelous thing to see, and it really stimulates your interest to think that things like that are out there for you to find. And if you're a collector, you know what I'm talking about. It's the search for this stuff that's almost as much fun as finding it. And then when you finally found it, it's like, find it, why, it's like goosebumps. So I went on from there. Now, at one time, I had several racks in here, and I had a whole array of different BB guns. Going all the way back, I had the Hamilton or premium gun, the one they gave away if you bought a windmill. They didn't even have one of those in the Daisy Museum when I was there in '92. So, and then I had a couple of first models, and I think I mentioned it earlier, you know, I had a Matchless and an Atlas and I had Uptons and I had Sterlings and American Tool Works and so on, Wyandottes. But eventually, about the same time that I decided to sell the cap guns, well, we decided to reduce our BB gun collection. Now I had all the pumps that are based on the King number 5, right? Daisy 105, Daisy 107. The 2 Rangers that were made for Sears, they're very similar but have a straight stock. I had both of those. And then I had some of the later 107s with plastic stocks. And it pretty much took up one rack here. And I sold those all to one collector. On another rack I had, starting with the 1,000-shot Daisy, known as the Bennett, and then the 500-shot Daisy, and then I had the early Model Bs that had butt plates and cast iron sights and so on. And I had a whole array of those early Daisies that went from right around the turn of the century up into the 20s, I think. And I also disposed of all of those, got rid of all of those. So the collection is vastly reduced. I guess that's an oxymoron, but and it isn't nearly as big as it was. And I just decided that I would keep the Red Ryders and I would keep the 1930s Daisies. And the 1930s Daisies principally are of interest, I think, is because that was the onset of the idea of the character gun. And I think that Red Ryder is really rooted in Buzz Barton. There's a lot of related stuff that you can collect when it comes to BB guns. A lot of other Daisy products. This is only one of a line of Daisy guns that were made in the late 30s, and Buck Rogers space type guns. You know, Buck was a pretty popular guy. There was a Saturday serial about him that I went to see with Buster Crabbe, who also played Tarzan in some of the early movies. But this is the I think it's 1935 version of the Buck Rogers pop gun. There's also a smaller one like this called the Wilma, and then there's several other guns of similar design. Most of those were painted. There's one that was blued and one that was copper plated and so on. So there's a whole, I mean, you could probably fill a display case with Daisy Buck Rogers stuff. There were holsters and helmets and so on, you know. Some of the other things that I've always been interested in, besides BB guns, was this guy right here. Growing up in the 1930s, I have to tell you that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7:30, there was only one radio program on, and that was the Lone Ranger. And so I was also very interested in the Lone Ranger, and at one time I had a pretty good collection of that stuff. And in this case here, there's some Lone Ranger collectibles. There's a matched pair of cast iron Lone Ranger cap guns, and this is a unique little set of cap guns in double holsters that was made for a girl, and it goes on like an apron. There's a panel in the front and then it hooks in the back, and the holsters would be here like on the front of your hips, and it was a set that was made for a girl. There's a whole array of other things that you can collect that's related to Daisy. the trucks. As most of you know, there's several versions of these die-cast trucks that are beautifully made, and I think I have the whole collection of everything they made that's in the original box. There's the Christmas story stuff. You could make a collection of that alone if you collected all the different BB guns, and there's several variations of the Christmas story gun, by the way. There isn't just one variation. A little sideline here. While I was collecting, I got to know this guy. You may recognize him. He was in the news quite a bit, a while back. That's Robert Little Beaver Blake, and he was at my house in Anaheim several years ago, and he brought this gun out to show me. I believe that he got this gun from Warren Rybar, and this basically is what he's holding. And it's a 47 style Red Ryder that's nickel plated, copper banded, except for not the muzzle band. And they coppered all the screws, are all coppered, and it's kind of got a pretty nice deluxe oak stock. And I was told that they made these guns as special presentation models for some of their top salesmen or preferred customers. They would give them these guns, and I think that they did the same thing with the number 25 pump gun. They would make deluxe versions of the number 25. I used to have a big collection of number 25s. They're almost all gone now, but here's one probably from the 20s. It's the early style with the straight stock and the box trigger guard, but it has the long throw lever. And prior to this gun, as most Daisy collectors are well aware, there were several other variations. This one here I think is about 1917, and it's, I believe it's the first variation that was made after the black nickel gun. The black nickel gun was nickel plated and then, quote, japanned. That meant I think that it was coated with some kind of black varnish that gave it a kind of a candy apple look, with the varnish being partially transparent and the nickel kind of coming through underneath. And one of the reasons that you know that this is an early gun is because the front sight's adjustable, goes back and forth. They did away with that, and I think one of the reasons they did away with it was because they were getting a lot of returns and complaints because these things got knocked off. So they just went to a fixed sight. If you ever run across a black nickel gun, it will probably look kind of ratty. The first one I saw was in an antique mall in Snohomish, Washington, and my first thought was, oh, somebody used a spray can to paint that gun. But then as I looked at it, I remembered what Jim Thomas, Mr. Daisy Thomas, had told me about the black nickel guns, and as I looked at it more carefully, I realized that that's what this gun was. One of the revealing things about the black nickel guns is underneath the barrel, right through here, underneath the cocking lever, there's a patch, a metal patch soldered on to the bottom of the barrel there to get a seal. They didn't have, apparently, the technology to get a seal on the air chamber, just through spot welding at that time, so they put a patch over that. So your black nickel gun will have the short throw lever, box trigger guard, straight stock, adjustable front sight. It will have the black nickel finish, which may look kind of ugly, and it'll have the barrel patch. And of course they had they call it the penny size takedown screw. Okay, here's George Rockford, the happy Daisy boy, holding in his hands an early number 25 pump gun. I think that this may be, and I'm a little weak on my knowledge on every variation of the number 25, but I think that this may be the gun that came right after the black nickel gun. I think it's about a 1917, and the features on this gun that make it what it is are the box trigger guard, straight stock, penny-sized takedown screw, short throw lever, and the most important feature that makes it an older gun is the front sight is adjustable. It'll slide back and forth. They did away with that, I'm sure, because they got a lot of returns. They got knocked off. Another interesting thing about guns from this general time period is that there's 2 screws holding this stock on. There's not a bolt through here. These are large wood screws, one on each side and one on the top, all the same size, I believe. So that's a pretty good representation of a very early number 25. Another classic Daisy gun, of course, and one that's hard to find in good condition, is the number 50, the Golden Eagle, which came out in 1936, and it was Daisy's commemorative of their 50th anniversary. It's interesting to note that when Daisy acquired King BB guns and became the manufacturer of King, they also took King's first year as the first year of Daisy, 1886. Okay, as I was saying, that it's my belief that Daisy borrowed 1886 as the first year of Daisy, because they didn't make a BB gun until 1888. But when they made this commemorative, it was based on 1886 to 1936, and it's the 50-year commemorative. And basically, if you look at this gun, you have the same gun actually that you have in the Red Ryder. The actual frame and barrel and everything there's some cosmetics that make it different. One is this, of course, the stock is painted black, and then there's this decal, and it's got Daisy with a golden eagle, and it's the 1886 to 1936, it says on it. Once again, I think that's kind of baloney, but that's what they put on the gun. And then the sight is engraved on the top with fancy scroll. It says Golden Eagle number 50, patent numbers, etc. And then it's got the so-called telescopic sight, which is, of course, not telescopic or telescopic. And one of the reasons I think so many of these guns, and the Buzz Bartons also, are found with that sight gone is, if you've ever looked through one and tried to find your target, it's almost impossible. They have a hole, there's a little plate, a little baffle in this thing with a peep sight hole in it. And I would say that hole is about a 32nd of an inch in diameter. Well, anybody knows about the field that you see through a scope, and you just don't have any field. You can't find what you're looking at. So I think the kids took them off and threw them away. And so a lot of these guns, along with the Buzz Bartons, turn up with the tube sight missing. Okay, now we're going to hark back to the very, very early days of BB guns, and this is what is believed to be the first commercially successful BB gun, made by Captain Markham. I think his first name was George, in Plymouth, Michigan. He was right across the tracks from Daisy making windmills, and Captain Markham making casks and barrels out of wood. So when he decided to produce a BB gun, what would he make it of? Wood, and that's what he did. This gun's made of maple. I think in Arnie Duncan's book, I think he says they believe that they made 50,000 of these. So even though it's the first commercially successful BB gun, it is far from the rarest BB gun. There's quite a few of these guns around. And the operation was simple. There's a operating lever here which locked under a little staple, and you just ease that out of there, open the gun, put your BB right there, then cock the gun, or I guess you could cock it and put the BB there, whichever you prefer to do. Close the gun. And this gun operated just like all the other, or most of the other BB guns from that era, and it's just basically like a bicycle pump. There's a piston here that's drawn back through a chamber, and when the gun is closed and locked and fired, the piston drives the air out, and out goes the BB. Probably not very hard in the case of this thing. So that was the first commercially successful BB gun, and it's also where Daisy got the 1886 date for their start, which was actually 1888. Did we want to talk about?
Shotgun.
Okay. Okay, the next gun we want to talk about is the 104. And, You'll see people say that this gun came out in various years. You hear 1940 a lot, but the first ads that I've seen are 1938, and probably made up till World War II or just before the war, when Daisy began to run out of sheet steel, and Cass Huff tells in his book how they scrounged everywhere they could trying to find sheet steel to stay in production, but eventually it ran out and they quit making guns. So 1938 to 1942 or thereabouts. And operation was just about like Dad's double barrel that he hunted rabbits with. The release lever up on the top released the gun, then you cocked it down. It had the force-fed barrels with, I think, 48 or 49 BBs in each tube. And for some reason, the tubes are marked R and L. I've never heard an explanation for why they would do that, since they're interchangeable. You can move one from one side to the other and they still work, but for some reason they marked them R and L. This gun cost $5. At the time, you could buy a Daisy for $1. So I've often referred to here in Southern California as the Beverly Hills Bb Gun. Because I never saw one and never heard of them when I was a kid. Nobody that I knew in Montebello, California had the 104 double barrel. This one here, by the way, would probably rate a good, strong, excellent condition. It's in really nice shape, and it's unusual to find stocks that are quite this clean. I mean, it's really a very, very nice gun, and I'm happy to have it. Well, in the early 1930s, I believe it was Cass Huff, who had been kind of, when he got out of college, been exiled over to King by the guys that were running Daisy, his father and his uncle and so on, to run the King Works. And he finally came back over around 1930 or so to Daisy to work. And I'm quite sure that it was Cass that came up with the idea of having a character gun. And this is the idea he came up with. Buzz Barton was a cowboy circus star originally, a teenager, a little freckle-faced guy. And somehow Cass apparently got in touch with him and probably paid some kind of premium to use his name on a Daisy BB gun. And the first one they produced in 1932, despite what you might read anywhere, the original hang tag on the inside refers to this gun as being a number 195 Model 32. And they first advertised this gun in October of 1932. And this is the first model, distinguished by the paper label. It's not a decal, it's just a paper label that was die cut out, printed. I think it's got 9 colors in it, printed, die cut, and then pasted on the stock. Of course, they're hard to find in really good condition. Especially to find one that's got a really good label on it. They don't turn up very often. So, and this gun here, looking at the finish, is like, wow, very, very nice. Hard to find stuff in this condition, and hard to find these hang tags. And this hang tag is also in excellent condition. Well, apparently they had some problems with the label peeling off, or for one reason or another, we can't be sure exactly why, they decided to go to a branded stock. And they made a stock that was very, very similar, and the brand on the stock that's up on the rack is a lot like the design of the paper label, but it's just branded on it. It's an oval with a horseman in it, and it says Buzz Barton number 195 Special. That's this gun here. Identical to the gun that you just saw, except it's got the branded stock rather than the paper label. So we're going to presume, because we do not know, there's no written records of this stuff, 1932, sometime after that. I've got 1934. Could have been 33. Nobody knows for sure. They went to the branded stock. But then they came out with the Super Buzz Barton. That's the top gun here. No, excuse me. It's the second gun down here. And this was basically, they had a gun they were already producing. It had a tube sight, nickel-plated, dark brown stock, 103, Model 33. They merely took that gun off the rack, changed the stock. They put a blonde stock on it and a star decal, and it's a Buzz Barton Super Special. And we're going to date that 1933 because it's a 103 Model 33. And as you know, Model 33 meant the year that they came out with the gun. So then the next character gun, well, let's go on to the last variation of the Buzz Barton. The last variation of the Buzz Barton was the number 195 Model 36. And from 1936 on, almost all the guns that you see that Daisy produced, the 195 Model 36, the number 50 Golden Eagle, the Carbine, and of course the early model Red Ryders. These guns were all based, they were all the same gun. I mean, all the parts from these guns are all interchangeable. Okay, then I think 1934, the next character gun was the famous Buck Jones with the compass and, as Ralphie said in the movie, that thing that tells time in the stock. And this was based on the King number 5 pump gun, which became the Daisy 105 pump gun, which became the Daisy 107 Buck Jones pump gun. And this is a Buck Jones, once again, condition. Collectors would die for stuff like this. It's very, very nice. And as far as I know, or I think anybody knows, this gun was produced right up to the advent of World War II. And of course, the Christmas Story movie was mixed up with this BB gun. I don't know if we have time to tell that whole story now, do we?
We'll get to that later.
Okay. But anyway, there's the second Daisy character gun, and as far as I know, the only real variation in the or the Buck Jones guns is that I believe the early compasses had a needle, and the later compasses were just a floating compass where the whole dial spun around. Okay, their next Daisy character gun, and the one that everybody knows about, is of course the Red Ryder. And according to the story that Cass Huff tells in his book, It's a Daisy, Fred Harmon took a train to Detroit, Michigan, took a taxi out to Plymouth, came up and knocked on the door at the Plymouth offices of Daisy and asked to see someone in authority, and eventually found his way into Cass's office. Fred, who had begun to draw the Red Ryder comic strip in 1938, he was first published, by Stephen Schlesinger, decided that it would be a good idea, probably having seen the Buck Jones BB gun, if there was a Red Ryder gun. And he brought, Cass Huff says, a carved wooden pistol to his office and said, look, why don't we make a Red Ryder pistol? Well, he wasn't an engineer and didn't realize how much it would cost or how difficult it would be to make a pistol BB gun. And all the retooling and design and everything. And so we think what happened is that, or more than we think, I think Cass outlines it in his book, that they suggested that rather than make a pistol, that a better idea would be to make a rifle. And Daisy collectors, long before what I think is the first Red Ryder was found, had already decided that the Red Ryder was a product of the previous Daisy character guns, the King Model 55-36, and the little 108-39 carbine. Because if you take these guns and compare them to the finished Red Ryder, you'll find that the combination of these two guns is what you find in the 40 Red Ryder. King 55-36. Now, before we turned up this King 55-36 copper banded Red Ryder, which is on the wall behind me, Myself and other Daisy Red Ryder collectors had long thought that the King Model 5536 was basically where the Red Ryder came from, just like the Golden Eagle and the Carbine. It was all basically this gun, King Model 5536. So to design a Red Ryder carbine, they took that gun, used these characteristics. This is what they were trying to duplicate. This is a real Winchester Model 1873 saddle ring carbine. This is the classic cowboy gun. And if you look at it and look at a Red Ryder, why, they're very, very similar. Here's the saddle ring, and I think that's the reason there's a saddle ring on the Red Ryder, because they were trying to duplicate this Winchester Western carbine. Well, the roots of the Red Ryder are in the Lone Scout BB gun, which became the carbine, as you well know. This particular gun is a Lone Scout, came from Plymouth, Michigan. I got it from the original owner, who was a girl. And it's interesting to note that quite often, if you find a really nice BB gun, you'll find a girl's name somewhere on the stock, because girls took better care of their toys than boys did. But I have a tag, and this was purchased at a hardware store in Plymouth by this lady's father in, I believe she had 1939. And of course became the carbine when they ran into some kind of like copyright problems. Somebody contacted them, and here's a newsletter copy, the Real Boys magazine, the Lone Scout magazine. And they were advised that this was a name that they couldn't or should not use. I think it was a friendly discussion they had, and Daisy immediately dropped the name Lone Scout and made the gun into the carbine. So this variation that says Lone Scout is pretty rare, but be it Lone Scout or carbine, it doesn't really matter. And going back in time a little bit, we can say that the carbine is actually the same gun as the Daisy 102 Model 36, 101 Model 36, the King 2236, or the King 5536. These are all basically the same gun. And collectors have often thought that this gun and this gun are like the mama and the papa of the Red Ryder, that's where the Red Ryder came from. The carbine and the King 5536, how did we go from these two guns to get this gun, which is a production model of the original 1940 Red Ryder? Well, we think. We don't know. We have no documentation. But we think that this is probably a Red Ryder prototype. And we think, once again, there's some conjecture here, but based on what we see, the evidence of the gun, that this gun was probably made by Lefevre at the factory. This gun is not a Daisy. This is a King Model 5536. And we think that after Fred Harmon came to see Cass Huff with his idea of making a pistol, and they decided to make a rifle instead, that what they did is they took a 5536 off the rack, took some of the parts that they were using on the Model 39, and produced this gun. Now, the rear sight is the same as the carbine. The front barrel band was another item that would have been available on the assembly line, because they had a barrel band like that on the carbine. The parts that were not available on the assembly line were the front barrel band. And this rear barrel band, this rear barrel band is obviously kind of handmade. It's neatly done, Doesn't look amateurish at all. The bends are very tight, not like something somebody could make in his garage. They're nice and square. You know, it doesn't look like a Mickey Mouse deal, but it's slightly thinner metal than the production bands. The loader tube. If the gun wasn't made in the factory, if it was made outside the factory somewhere, where would somebody get the material to put a loader tube on that was longer than the loader tube on the carbine? You couldn't take a carbine and take the loader tube off and put it on this gun. It's not long enough. So they would have had to have access to this material. Not likely that anyone would have access to this material outside the factory. If you look at this gun carefully, the saddle ring is tabbed on. Production guns had a thing they called a staple that went through the body, it went through the frame of the gun. This is just put on with a metal tab. Some other interesting things, if you want to examine the gun in real detail, are up here in the front. There's two things that are interesting. First, that, and you can't see this, we don't have enough light in here, but as you know, this is a false tube and never contains BBs. There's a deflector in here, and when you pour the BBs in, they're deflected into the main barrel. That's where that 1,000 shots came from. So there had to be a way for the BBs to get from this tube into this barrel. And there is. There's a port, a square port cut in here, and it's obviously hand done. It wasn't part of the original stamping. It was done later. Another really telling piece of evidence is if someone outside the factory made this gun, how did they manage to leave the loading port that would be in a Model 5536, which would be a hole? How did they manage to not have a loading port in the gun? Because any gun that came out of the factory as a finished 5536 would have had a port there where BBs could be loaded into the gun. There's a circle there where the port should be, but there is no loading port. Now another interesting thing is, and well, we're going to take some look at some of the interesting features of this gun that make it unique. And so we'll take off the forestock band and let's take off the stock. Now notice that the hole for the stock is not centered in the middle of the forestock. So here we have what I believe to be the prototype and a production gun side by side showing the difference in where the screws are, and also incidentally showing that this forestock is slightly longer than the production forestock. Now I'm going to take this forestock off. And in I think it was about 93 or 94, Wes Powers was at our house in Anaheim, and we went over this gun together, Wes knowing more than I did about Daisy BB guns. And one of the things that we thought probably happened is that when they went to turn this into a Red Ryder BB gun using parts from the carbine, that their first attempt was probably this. And the hole corresponds with that hole. So what both Wes and I thought was probably, take a look at it. It doesn't look good. The forestock is too small for the gun, and it looks, what I would say, weak. It's just too little for a gun that long. So if they were trying to make something that looked like a real Winchester, you know, I mean, it just didn't work. It didn't look right. And so we think that what they did was they decided that they had to have a bigger forestock. Well, There was nothing in the factory like that. They didn't have any bigger forestocks. But they did have a wood shop at that time. They made their own stocks at that time. They didn't farm them out. And so we think that they made this forestock. And having designed the gun for the small forestock and putting the screw hole here, they had to match that up with this forestock and put the screw hole off center to make it work. Now the forestock itself, now remember they did have their own wood shop, so they were perfectly capable of turning something out that was well finished, you know, looked like a really nice finished product. But if you look on the inside of it, it's not like the production forestocks. It obviously was machine made here. This was cut in by machinery, but it was also fitted a little bit. If you can get the light right, you'll see where it wasn't quite wide enough. There's chisel marks there and here that they had to use to fit it. And it looks like they had to do a little woodwork here too on the inside of the thing to make it work right. So both Wes and I agreed that this is probably a one-of-a-kind part that was made for this particular gun. And it's not the same as the production forestocks. So we both thought, and I continue to think, that it's very unlikely that anyone outside the factory made this forestock. And it just seems logical that things happened here the way I've described them, that they tried the small forestock, that it didn't work. So here's the chronology of the production of the original 1940 Red Ryder as I see it. Starting off with the concept of making a gun that looked like a real, honest-to-God Western cowboy carbine. This is a 1873 saddle ring Winchester carbine. They took, wanting to produce something that looked something like this, they took a gun that was almost the same size, a little shorter, the King Model 5536, used the cosmetics that they had used on the carbine and on the Lone Scout, forestock, front barrel band, curve lever, pistol grip stock, and took one of these guns, used these cosmetics to create this gun, which I feel is the only known prototype of the 40 Red Ryder. And using, you know, all the ideas that they developed when they made this gun at the factory, they applied them to what basically was a King Model 5536, but now it was stamped number 111 Model 40 Red Ryder. Okay, over here in this rack we have an array of, it's somewhat a duplication of what you've already seen in the other racks, but on this rack we have, starting with the Lightning Loader, an array of the original Red Ryders with the proper boxes that they came in, and including, I've never polished the copper on this gun because I didn't want to touch it. It's exactly the way I got it, along with the box from the original owner, with the exception I added this, and I think technically this is a little later than the gun, but it goes down through various models of the gun, all the way down to the cork gun. I couldn't manage to fit the cork gun box into my display, so I found the original cork gun. Oops. Yeah, and they don't say it's a Red Ryder. They just say that it's a cork bullet shooter. But the gun has a Red Ryder logo on the stock. And then in the case, there's just an array of some of the many, many, many Red Ryder collectibles. And I'm sure that if you are a Daisy collector or a Red Ryder collector, you'll know that there's an awful lot of stuff, and you could have a huge collection of Red Ryder stuff and not have any BB guns. Just you know, there's a double holster set, and if I could just reach over here, and this is the box that the holster set came in. It's a pretty rare and hard to find item. So there's the double holsters. There's a hat, there's a school bag that still has the tag on it. Everybody knows about the Wells Lamont salesman sample glove case there. In the corner there's the Indian on the Red Ryder horse that was put out by Wells Lamont. And incidentally, that's the only one I've ever seen that came in the original box with the spear, the knife, the tomahawk, the bow, and the headdress. And it's in the original box that it came in. And there's an array of Red Ryder gloves. And as you know, if you're a collector, there's many, many, many variations of the Red Ryder Wells Lamont gloves. And booklets and big little books. There's a picture in there. You probably won't be able to see it on the video, but it's me and Fred Harmon III taken in Pagosa Springs, and Fred is holding the first production copper-banded Red Ryder that came off the assembly line. It's signed by Cass Huff, and the guy that was the Daisy president then might have been Baker, I'm not sure. And of course I tried to talk Fred out of that gun. He just laughed at me. And you know, there's the wallet and the watches, and like I say, I haven't got it all, and I don't know if I'd want to collect it all. But here's an interesting thing that you might want to see, and this is a catalog that they put out. I don't know if the glare is going to bother you a lot, but this catalog is very hard to find, and this one here is brand new, mint. And one of the things that's interesting about it is when it came out. This was mailed and it cost 1.5 cents, and it's dated April the 2nd, 1940. So they were actually mailing out the catalogs before they ran their first ads in American Boy and so on. And probably the envelope is rarer than the little catalog. But that's one of the things, one of my kind of prized Red Ryder possessions, because it's so directly connected to the BB gun, and it's a fine example of Fred Harmon art. Also down here, and once again, I don't know if we'll be able to pick it up, but there's a copper-banded Red Ryder in the case here that's really in beautiful condition, almost new. It came from the estate of Boss Prendergast, who was a high-powered politician in Kansas City, I think in the 20s, kind of like a Boss Tweed type of guy. It came from his estate, and scratched on the stock it says, "To Tom," Prendergast's name was Tom Prendergast, "To Tom from Fred Harmon," is scratched on the stock. And underneath it's an envelope containing from the paperwork from the gentleman that liquidated the Prendergast estate that I got the gun from. So that's it's not only one of the best copper-banded Red Ryders I ever saw, but it's also autographed by Fred Harmon, which makes it a really nice gun. And behind it's almost, well, I'm going to say an excellent Model 5536, once again showing that the 5536 and the Red Ryder, same gun with the cosmetics, you know. Okay, as to the origin of where they came up with the name Red Ryder, when Fred Harmon started into the cartoon business, he created a character called Bronk Peeler. And we think when he took that to Stephen Schlesinger in New York and tried to get into the comic business, Schlesinger told him it was not a good name, because even though people on Western cattle ranches knew what that meant, the general public would have no idea. So we think that he searched for another name. A year or so before that, Buck Jones had made a movie, The Red Ryder, and there's a copy of that book in the case too. And we think, once again, this is just surmise, but it seems likely that Harmon had stumbled across that name and borrowed the name Red Ryder from Buck Jones's movie, The Red Ryder. And so we think that that's probably where the name Red Ryder came from. Okay, well, the 1938 Bs, incidentally, this is an AB. It's marked 1938A on the top, but then it was converted into a B, but they marked them, they put a little decal on them, model 1938 AB. So it's actually a B, but it's marked A, it's stamped A. And then here's the two commemoratives. This is the original from 1988 that was only made during 1988, and the 1989 was made for, I think, 2 or 3 years. As you know, if you're a daisy collector, you know that the medallions are a little different, they're a little bit different. And going down through the many commemoratives that they've made over the years, and you know, they've made so many of them that I've kind of, to some extent, lost track of all of them. But there's the It's a Daisy model, and then there's this is an NRA model. This is a Mountain Elk model, Ducks Unlimited. What's this one? Oh, and then, of course, there's the Buffalo Bill gun. And Buffalo Bill it's a European variation because everybody in Europe knows who Buffalo Bill was, but nobody knows who Red Ryder was. Buffalo Bill toured Europe when he had his Wild West show. So to export the gun, they made it into a Buffalo Bill, which is what this is. Another variation of the Red Ryder.
Go ahead.
Okay. Up top here we have some ads. The Lightning Loader. And the guy that had this in his collection actually had my initials. It says BB Gun Prices 1940 JB Collection. I don't know who he was, found it at an auction. But anyway, it's the Lightning Loader, and the ad's probably from 39 or 40. This is a duplicate. It's a color copy of the original 1940 ad announcing the sensational new 1,000-shot Red Ryder carbine, where they first begin to talk about golden banded. And then the way I date the gun that's all plastic stock and forearm, is the Saturday Evening Post December 1951 ad, which clearly shows the plastic stock gun. That's the first ad or reference to the thing that I've ever seen. So when I talk about years, I always call that gun a 51. Okay, this is a gun I got from Jim Dry, and the story goes, and I really don't know if the story is all true, was that at some point their stamping branding machine at the factory broke down, and I guess they couldn't get it fixed right away, and they silk screened Red Ryder onto some of the BB guns for a while. And Jim found this gun somewhere and sent it to me with the silkscreen logo on it instead of being branded in. Back to the original Red Ryder, starting at the top, the copper banded gun, a gun that I consider to be a pre-World War II gun. They had started to spot weld this band on because they couldn't copper plate them anymore, but this gun I found from a guy in Kansas, and his dad bought it for him, and it's got a spot welded front band and a copper stock band. I think it's probably pre-war. Once again, just that's what I think. 1942, after the war, we still have the small screw and the adjustable sight, iron lever. 1946, fixed sight, still some iron levers around, probably left over from before the war, and the screw is still small. 1947, this one I found mint in the box, and it's got all the characteristics of the 47. Large screw, fixed sight, spot welded, and aluminum lever painted. 1950, I think, they began to make the transition to plastic. So wood stock, plastic forestock. And notice that they've gone back to the adjustable screw in the rear sight. 1951, I'm dating this gun to go with this ad, which says December of 1951 and clearly shows the plastic stock gun. That's why I believe that this gun was introduced in 1951. This is one of the most collectible of the Red Ryders and one of the hardest to find. It's the same as this gun except for one important feature. It has a painted finish. And it's the only number 111 Model 40 that was painted. These things were probably only made in 1954. Very few of them around and very hard to find them in good condition like this one. So it's a 1954 111 40 with a painted finish. Then, as you know, they did away with 111 40 and they went to the Model 94 Red Ryder. And here it is. This was, not long before they were getting ready to leave. And then in 1957, they left Plymouth and went to Rogers, Arkansas. And at that time, I believe, they stopped making Red Ryders. So the last Red Ryders were made in Plymouth. When they went to Rogers for Christmas of 1957, and then they were in Rogers in January of 58. This gun was no longer the Red Ryder. It became the Model 94 Western Carbine. Same gun. And there were no more Red Ryders made until 1972 when they reintroduced a gun that's very similar to the original 111 40. This was a Model 1938. No B, Model 1938. And it has all the basic characteristics of the original gun. There's some variation. The lever's a little different. There's an oil hole and the band is narrower, but basically they went back to the 111 40, the configuration of the gun. And then they made that up until 79 when the 1938 B came out. So that's pretty much the chronology of the Red Ryders. On the bottom of the rack's a gun that I can't date, but it was made in Plymouth. And as you can see, it's a little Red Ryder pop gun. It's an interesting little gun, and it's a pretty hard gun to find. They finally were reduced to making things like this. This is a Red Ryder gun, and on the top of it, it says Daisy Model 938 Toy Gun. Okay, and down here underneath the rack, we have this little buckaroo with a genuine Red Ryder hat, by the way, with a rickrack Indian design, just like Red Ryders. And he's holding in his hot little hands what I think Daisy was finally reduced to, making toy guns. And the gun that he's got there is just like this one in the original package. And it's marked Daisy, what was it marked, Will? Daisy 938 Toy Gun, that's it. And it's got the required orange barrel plug that I guess the feds required that. And some of the other collectibles we have, here's the Red Ryder target set in the original box in excellent condition with the original targets and instructions printed in green ink, which is correct. Here's an array of the original Lone Ranger books, all marked as being authored by Franz Stryker, which isn't true. He had a ghostwriter. And then there's the Red Ryder books. And that's pretty much a complete collection of all the Red Ryder. And there's a Red Ryder little book to put them in. Let's see, we've already seen this. On the wall here, there's just an array of all kinds of Daisy ads, Fred Harmon art. That's a Fred Harmon print that's hand signed by Fred. And some of the older ads, some of them laminated, some of them pretty old. There's a nice old King ad there, a reproduction of the Daisy Sentinel air rifles ad. That's just a repro. Bill Johnson, I think, who lives, I think, in Central California now, gave me that copy. And there's the print. Can you get this wall, Fred, on the left at all? The print on the left there that's so nicely matted, that's the one that came with the Red Ryder BB gun that had the gold medallion in the stock. It all started here, and the kid's Christmas morning, he's got his Red Ryder with the box outside, and his parents are looking through the window with a big smile on their face because the kid got his BB gun. Below that, there's an old blueprint of the Daisy plant from years ago. And there's a picture of the plant at the bottom, and then there's a print of the layout of the plant where all the work was done. And it even mentions they had their own plating, they did their own plating, and they had their own woodworking mill and so on.